From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
In this polarizing political climate, it's not easy being a congressman. Gridlock and conflict seem to be paralyzing Washington, D.C. This month, a tax cut for millions of Americans hung in the balance. Polls show voter discontent is high, especially for first-term U.S. Representative David Cicilline. What is the embattled lawmaker thinking 1 year after getting elected to Congress, and what response does he have for his legions of critics? This week on Newsmakers, Congressman David Cicilline. Good morning, welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, Congressman. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thanks for having me.
We clearly have a lot to talk about. We mentioned the Brown University poll, the redistricting process, and we want to talk to you about PROCAP as well. But I want to start first with what's hot out of Washington, D.C., and that's the payroll tax cut. You are always quick to claim that the GOP wants to change Medicare, privatize Social Security, but you're pushing hard for an extension to the payroll tax cut. Wouldn't that just continue to weaken the very thing you accuse the Republicans of trying to undercut, and that is Social Security?
No. Look, this action by the House Republicans this past week is going to have a devastating impact on American families and on our economy. The idea that in this moment that they are fighting and have successfully so far defeated a payroll tax cut for middle-class families that will cause 160 million American families to see a tax increase this year, to have that taxes raised in the middle of this incredibly difficult economy, and to end unemployment insurance for millions of Americans. By the middle of February, over 2 million Americans will lose their health insurance.
So why not make it permanent then, Congressman?
No, it should be permanent. Look, we have always suggested it should be permanent, but the reality is the Senate passed a compromise supported by 89 members of the Senate. Democrats and Republicans came together and agreed on an extension
for 2 months.
For 2 months, so we can guarantee that taxes don't go up on the middle class, so that we can guarantee that unemployment benefits aren't ended. We obviously have to continue to find a long-term solution, but the answer shouldn't be increase taxes on the middle class, end unemployment, and that the consequences for families. I have a section on my website asking people to share with me stories about what the impact would be if unemployment benefits were ended. These are heartbreaking stories. This is a hard time for Rhode Islanders.
But what you're supporting, you'll be having this debate again in 2 months,
but
right?
What we want to make sure is unemployment benefits continue and taxes are not raised on the middle class. There will be plenty of opportunity to make sure that that continues for a year, but cutting them off now so that come January 1, taxes go up for 160 million hardworking middle-class families and unemployment is ended is a terrible idea.
Will Democrats ever support an end now to this? When do you allow the payroll tax to expire and let taxes go back up? It was supposed to be temporary, and that's the funds that go into the Social Security Trust
Fund. Well, again, I think the position I have taken certainly is that the tax cuts that expired or that were extended for people at the very top, the richest people in this country, those ought to expire. I disagree when the president extended those.
Although you did vote for it.
That was part of the entire budget compromise. But those tax cuts at the very top need to expire. But the reality is this is not a time to increase taxes on the middle class of this country. It is not a time to end unemployment benefits. We have 15 million Americans out of work, looking hard for jobs. Jobs don't exist in part because we haven't taken the action in Congress that will help to create jobs and create the conditions for job growth.
But the payroll tax funds the Social Security program. Are you saying that the entitlement programs are healthy right now?
First of all, I don't call them entitlement programs. I think it's very important to recognize that Social Security and Medicare are earned benefits. Those are things which people paid into over a lifetime of earned. And we have to do everything we can to strengthen and fortify both of those programs. And there are lots of things we can do. For example, when you look at the Medicare program, how can you strengthen Medicare? One of the things we can do, and I've introduced co-sponsored legislation to do this and sent a letter to Director Sebelius asking that she be authorized to do this, we can allow the government to negotiate discounted pharmaceutical prices with the pharmaceutical industry.
Isn't that a drop in the bucket here?
It's not a drop in the bucket. It's tens of billions of dollars that could be saved if we're allowed to negotiate the way they do at the VA. So there are ways to reduce costs without reducing services.
President Obama, the leader of your party, was clearly willing to go much further than that during the deficit deal. He was looking to raise the Medicare age to 67. Could you have supported that?
I think before we ever look at raising the age for Medicare or Social Security, there's there's a lot more work to do. And I think when people talk about raising the age, particularly in Social Security, you know, I was at a factory in my district, a resin factory where they do, you know, sailboat construction. You know, tough work environment, you know, really hard. By the time those folks are 65 years old, 67 years old, they're done. They can't work another 2 years. And so I think it's easy for people to theoretically say, oh, 2 more years. But you look at some of the work conditions that folks, you know, who are not sitting at a desk or one of these fancy tables, but are working in really tough environments. Congressman, increasing the retirement age, I think, is a lot harder to do.
The redrawing of the state's congressional districts has gotten a lot of attention, so I'd like to dive in there. Your spokeswoman told me last June that you supported an approach that would disrupt the least number of voters. You signed on to a similar letter with your colleague, Congressman Jim Langevin. At the same time, you were working on a very different plan that would expand the disruption for voters by about 15 times the minimum number. So weren't you trying to have it both ways?
No, I think, you know, Jim and I both submitted a letter to the commission making that first recommendation. After that letter was submitted, the commission released 3 plans that were very different. Obviously, they rejected the approach that Jim and I suggested. They released 3 plans, and then a whole series of conversations occurred, you know, between my team and the consultants and the redistricting process, and Jim's team. Everyone, they did the same thing we did, and I think they ultimately made a determination. They introduced more plans, and I think at the end there were 6 or 7 different versions. Some of those were better, had better Democratic performance, some had worse, but in the end the commission makes the decision.
But Congressman Langevin's office said that you were being disingenuous about this, but that there was behind-the-scenes maneuvering to help you in 2012.
I don't think there's any question. Both Jim's team and my team did exactly the same things. They met with the consultants.
So what do you make of them lashing out at you?
Look, this redistricting process happens all over the country in every single congressional district. You know, in some places, you know, it ends up that incumbents run against each other because they're put in the same districts. In some places, the lines are moved dramatically. In some places, they're moved a little. But you know, it's not at all uncommon that the political teams from all of the different various candidates participate and are briefed and advocate, and Jim's office did that, my office, my campaign did that, and that's the way the process works.
Does this make you look desperate that you were backing a plan that would have disrupted 150,000 voters compared to the minimum of about 7,200?
My campaign team, I'm sure, advocated positions that they thought were strengthening Democratic performance. Jim's campaign or his team did the same thing. I think most people don't care about this. You know what people care about? They care about what we're doing to get this economy back on track, how to get Rhode Islanders back to work.
Cicilline, you have a 23% approval rating. People want to know that you're being straight with them. And you send a letter in October, yet we see emails going back to June showing you guys and your campaign team looking at a much broader set of changes.
There's no question. Jim and I sent a letter to the commission with the expectation or the recommendation that the lines be moved only in Providence. The commission then released 3 maps, which were very different. And as a consequence of those 3 maps being released, we were briefed on those 3 maps, both of our teams. Our teams then advocated, you know, either parts of those maps or different maps, and then new maps were introduced. And so there's nothing that my campaign team did that Jim's team didn't do, and that's a normal part of a redistricting process. People are advocating for districts that have a greater Democratic performance, just like there was a map advocated by some of the Republicans in this race. That's a normal process.
Did you meet with Speaker Fox and Senate President Pavel about redistricting?
All of the redistricting conversations about those maps happen between consultants and our respective teams.
When Congressman Langevin lashed out, or his office did anyway, did you have a conversation with him after that, going, hey, Jim, what was that all about?
Oh, Jim, I talk to Jim every day that we're in Washington, and almost every day.
Just avoid this topic? I mean, it seems a very public fight between the two offices.
I didn't see it that way. Look, I think, you know, Jim's team, you know, got very animated in this process. I'm sure my team got very animated. That's not unusual in a redistricting process, and I continue to have a great working relationship.
I mean, Kennedy and Langevin, it was nothing like that 10 years ago. Political
observers
are astonished.
You look at what's happening around the country in redistricting. I have the ranking member of my Foreign Affairs Committee is in a primary against another member on our committee. I mean, it happens. You know, no incumbent is entitled to a district. The commissions get to decide that. We're not entitled to one that is similar to the one that we have, exactly the way we have. We don't get to decide that. Commissions get to decide that, and there's nothing unusual about the redistricting. And I, with all due respect, Ted, I disagree with you. I think what people really want to see is what we're doing in Washington to get people back to work, to get this economy on track, to focus on the urgent needs that are facing people in terms of our housing crisis, the unemployment crisis, how are we protecting Social Security and Medicare. Those are the things I hear from my constituents. They're worried about the future. They're worried about, are they going to be able to find a job? They're worried if they're a senior, are they going to hold on to Medicare? Are there going to be changes? And the reality is, there are big differences in Washington, and it matters a lot who Rhode Island sends to Washington, on what side of the aisle they are.
But it also matters
on those
when the money gets back to Rhode Island. And as you mentioned, housing, low-income heating assistance, that money goes to the Providence Community Action Program. Its budget almost doubled with the stimulus money coming into the state. You know, you are, we now know, as mayor, were really the only independent check on the board. There's 15 members on the board, 5 chosen by the board itself on a list they create, 5 in these elections from low-income people that they can't point us to when they happen, and then 5 from the mayor. Did you exercise due diligence over ProCap? That was the time you were in charge of federal money, too?
Absolutely. The board that is, first of all, the responsibility for the management of that agency is, of course, the employees. And so the management and employees of that agency have to be held accountable for their behavior. They're expected to discharge their responsibilities properly. But there's also a board of directors. And the board of directors is 15 members who have oversight responsibility, fiduciary responsibilities. The mayor appoints 5 of those. 10 of those come, so as you said, some are elected or some are appointed within the organization. That's the first line, and I'm very pleased that the board made some decisions about new leadership and about receivership.
After replacing your appointees.
Some of my appointees. But that's the board's responsibility, and that's the responsibility for the oversight of any agency as a board. But the important thing is that ProCap provides very important services on home heating assistance, on housing assistance, rental assistance, and any time an agency has federal money, they have a responsibility to use that federal money properly and to be accountable for every single penny. That's the responsibility of the staff of the board, and that's obviously the responsibility for the board in its oversight.
We know some of that money, the weatherization money now, or at least the new management is saying that that money was diverted to go to payroll and not go to home heating oil assistance. And people are saying, including new management, that ProCap was a cesspool for cronyism. Knowing what you know now, do you agree with that?
I don't know enough about what you just described, but there is no question that the person who is now leading that agency, someone I know well, Frank Shea, I have tremendous confidence in him. I think he will take whatever steps are necessary to be sure that that agency is strengthened and functions properly. The work that they do is too important, but it's also really important that the board members take the responsibility of oversight of that agency seriously. I've served on boards in my life, and you certainly want to be sure that you're discharging your responsibilities and asking the questions.
One of your appointees to the ProCap was Joan Badway, who was the head of the Providence Democratic Party during your 2 terms as mayor. Did she ever advise you of the problems at ProCap?
No.
How do you explain that?
Well, again, the board responsibilities, I think the chairman of the board was Michael Salmon, said none of this came to his attention until he saw the audit report recently. So I think, you know, they have to, hopefully as part of their reforms, they're going to create mechanisms for regular reporting to board members so that they will have an opportunity to provide the kind of oversight.
You appointed political operatives like Badway, Leo Parada, politically connected people like the brother of Councilman Nick Narducci. Do you bear a responsibility for ProCap's reputation as a dumping ground for cronies?
No, again, I think board members, I've always appointed people to the board that I thought were capable of doing the work and would do it responsibly. I think that board has 15 members. It is always the responsibility of board members of any agency to provide the oversight that's necessary to be sure that the agency is functioning properly.
Okay, we have to take a break. We have so much more on the list for our guest, Congressman David Cicilline, including pension reform. You'll want to stick around. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi, and from Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Our guest this week is Congressman David Cicilline. Ian.
Congressman, you were publicly silent this year on the subject of pensions, the dominant Rhode Island story of the year. Did you support or oppose Gina Raimondo's decision to leave out of the pension bill the locally managed pensions in cities in your district such as East Providence, Cumberland, Newport, and Providence?
I have tremendous respect for Gina Raimondo and for the work that she did, and for the legislative leaders and the legislature for the work they did. That was hard work, and I have tremendous respect for them. With respect to municipal pensions, I think the challenge is...
Did you support or
I'm going to answer your question. Okay. I think with respect to municipal pensions, inclusion in the state overhaul probably would have complicated and maybe delayed action by the legislature, because the communities each have different pension systems. So I think there's no question there needs to be serious pension reform at the local level. We proposed and enacted some at the city level. I wasn't successful in getting the council to pass all of it. So I know how hard that is, but it has to happen. But each of the cities and towns have multiple plans. I think it would have been harder and probably subjected the state overhaul to a more serious legal challenge if they were all lumped together. But I think Gina has made it clear that she's committed to working closely with the cities and towns to craft solutions that fit each of those communities in a responsible way.
During your 8 years as mayor of Providence, how many times did the city make its annual required contribution for its local pension fund?
We made it every year, and I think the last year, one thing that we set out, we had a plan to be sure that we made 100% contribution to the system to keep us current, which doesn't deal with the unfunded liability, but it stops the bleeding. And I want to give the council a lot of credit for that. Councilman Kevin Jackson, who was finance chair, really developed that plan early on in my first term. And I think with the exception of the last year, or maybe last 2 years, we were at 100%. I think the last year was 90.
You're saying you made the ARC 6 times in your administration?
Yeah, I think to the 100%. I think 2 years we got over 90, but didn't. But the unfunded liability occurred because, and this happened in Providence for many years before I took office, that the city didn't make its 100% contribution.
Granted, the unfunded liability existed before you came into office, but how do you explain how Gina Raimondo came in office for less than a year? She was a driving force in helping Rhode Island to cut its unfunded liability in the state system. You were mayor for 8 years, and yet the unfunded liability in the city just continues to grow.
Well, we put forth a pension review committee that made a set of, I think, 8 or 10 recommendations we put before the council. Some of those were enacted by the council, some weren't. So I know how hard it is to get those changes made. I have tremendous respect for what Gina was able to do, working with, again, the legislative leaders and the governor, and there was, I think, a willingness at all levels within state government to do this work. And I applaud Gina and the Speaker and the Senate President and the members of the and the governor for working together to solve this problem, and I think we need to do the same thing at the local level.
Your final budget in Providence was balanced with a $35 million so-called green loan to do a sale-leaseback with city buildings. The Wall Street Journal said that, quote, skirts laws on using bonds for deficits. Did that skirt the law?
No. Look, that was a conversation that we began. It was approved by the Taveras administration and by the council.
But 7 months into the fiscal year when they arrived.
7 months into the fiscal year, it was approved. I think they made the right decision because it was a borrowing that they did in order to avoid raising additional taxes. It was something which was approved by the council. And
but didn't that just kick the can down the road a year and push off the taxes that all rose on us this year?
I think what communities are doing, and I had to make those decisions when I was mayor, the new mayor has to make those decisions about balancing a whole set of options. How do you protect taxpayers from another tax increase? How do you protect the level of city services? And how do you do that in a responsible way? We did that for 8 years. For 8 years, we balanced the budget. For 8 years, we got A ratings in our rating agencies. We had to make difficult decisions. There's now a new mayor in the city who's going to have difficult decisions to make. This is a hard time for cities and towns, and Providence is obviously going to be no exception. But you have to balance those equities of how do you protect the level of city services, how do you protect residents from a tax increase, and how do you make decisions that you think are right to get the city through a really, really difficult economic time.
Congressman, in the spirit of Sarah Palin, Ted and I had asked the city of Providence for your emails, not including ones to and from constituents during your last 2 years as mayor. They denied our request. Would you voluntarily hand over those emails in the spirit of transparency?
Well, they're not mine to hand over, and obviously I'm not going to undermine.
Would you have been willing to do that?
I'm not going to undermine the mayor's, this administration's decision. And I think one of the things that they talked about, which is an important issue, is you want a mayor of a city to be able to have candid advice from members of his administration, and that ability to get candid advice is central to good decision making.
Why are emails different than memos, which are of public record?
I don't know the legal, that's a legal determination department. I'm just
it doesn't matter.
I think there's a reason.
If work is being done for the people, should it be public record?
And you're hiding behind the law in that statement. What do you believe in?
What I'm saying to you is I'm not going to undermine a decision made by Mayor Taveras or his administration about what they think is appropriate.
What's your philosophy on that?
Yeah.
Do you
what
think
do you believe about public records?
I think it's very important that a chief executive of a city or state or the president or any other chief executive have the ability to receive regular and candid recommendations from their staff, and that those conversations, which are part of the executive function,
isn't that the work of the people? Isn't that something that should be a public record?
Well, I don't think I think there are parts of that conversation when the president confers with his cabinet members or when a governor confers with his directors, that they have to have an ability to be frank and share advice that they don't necessarily get communicated widely. Otherwise, you're going to not have the benefit of having members of a cabinet that are going to say whatever they think if they fear that it's going to be written about tomorrow in the paper. So I think there's some balance you have to strike between ensuring that a chief executive of an agency or of a government has the ability to get candid advice, and obviously that you want to have the most transparency that you possibly can have and share with the public, and I think we have robust mechanisms to do that, but I'm not going to second guess the decision made by this administration or their council.
I want to take it back to Washington and national politics if we could. The more we watch what's going on down there, it seems like the Democrats can't do anything. Even if you agree with the Democrats' priorities, it's just ineffectual. The Republicans can do his filibuster, and they block everything President Obama likes if he comes out in support of it. So maybe our best bet is to elect Republicans, because that's the only way you can get anything done, because they block everything.
Or give the control back to the Democrats. Look, you're right. It is a very frustrating time, and I think people have an absolute... It is easy to understand that people are frustrated and disappointed with Congress of the United States. And we've put forth, and my focus has been, finding very practical ways that I can help Rhode Islanders, my constituents, and to help our state get on the right track. And we've put forth, and I've put forth as part of my work, efforts to rebuild American manufacturing, the Make It in America block grant, things to really rebuild.
But isn't that it? All you can do is put forth,
but of course, we're in the minority right now. But the reality is, I think it is very important in this next election who controls the House of Representatives. We've put forth a plan to get Americans back to work, to invest in rebuilding the infrastructure of this country, to protect our seniors by protecting Medicare and Social Security, to repeal, which I've introduced legislation to repeal tax breaks that are shipping American jobs overseas, to end subsidies to big oil companies. There's a big difference of who controls that chamber and who Rhode Island sends to Washington. Because the Republican agenda in the House under the Ryan budget was to end Medicare, was to keep in place billions of dollars in subsidies to big oil, was to keep in place tax breaks that are shipping American jobs overseas, to give another tax break to millionaires and billionaires at the expense of the middle class. So there are big differences that we're fighting over. And you're right. Right now we're in the minority in the House. But what we're
in the majority in the Senate, we still can't do anything.
But what we're fighting over in the House are things that really matter to this country and to Rhode Island. And the one thing I've learned for sure is it makes a difference. We have a big stake in who we send to Washington and what side of the aisle they stand on or sit on these really important issues. And we have to figure out a way to work together. And for the next year, we're going to still be in the minority.
No one will disagree with that.
So we've got to figure out how to work together.
Are we better off now than we were a year ago when we elected you, when the people elected you as congressman?
Well, I think we're definitely better off because we don't have another vote for John Boehner and Eric Cantor and the extreme Republican
You think that's what people in a double-digit
unemployment
rate are thinking?
Look, all I'm saying to you is we need to continue to fight for the things. First of all, we need to keep fight for the things that are going to get people back to work. But the most important thing I want to tell you is my most important responsibility right now is the work that we do in my district office to help constituents every day. We've had over 600 cases. We've gotten over $230,000 back to people in the 1st Congressional District that was stuck in some federal bureaucracy, helping people with actual cases. That's the most important responsibility right now.
If electing more Democrats is so important, why does your successor in Providence, Angel Taveras, and City Council President Michael Solomon, why are they non-committal about endorsing you for re-election?
The re-election is a long time away.
Have you spoken to them about that?
The re-election is a long time away, and I have no doubt that people in those positions and people in Providence and people in Rhode Island will understand what's at stake in the next election. And it will matter to places like Providence and Rhode Island to not have a Republican in this seat who will support a cut in the Community Development Block Grant Program, who will vote to end Medicare.
So is your argument next year going to come down to, you may be mad at me for how I did as mayor, you may not be happy with the situation in Providence, but I'm a good liberal Democrat and I'm in Congress now, and that's what matters.
My argument is what matters most importantly is who is working hard every day to get Rhode Island back on the right track, to get Rhode Islanders back to work, to support the policies that we know will be successful in getting people to work in Washington. Who's going to fight to protect Medicare and Social Security? Who's going to fight to rebuild the infrastructure of our country? Who's going to fight for investments in education and Pell Grants and Head Start and higher education? And who's going to fight to end subsidies to big oil companies and to repeal tax breaks that are shipping American jobs overseas, to rebuild American manufacturing? All those things are in the Republicans are opposing all those things. They're trying to keep those subsidies. They're fighting to keep subsidies to big oil companies. They're fighting to keep the tax breaks that are shipping American jobs overseas. They're attacking Medicare, Social Security, the social safety net of our country. These are important differences. And what I think is that Rhode Islanders care about those things. They care about people getting back to work. They care about protecting our seniors. They care about our environment. They care about investing in education. There are big differences between what the Republicans in the House, and the leadership particularly, and the Tea Party that's driving the agenda in the House, and what I think most Rhode Islanders believe.
Congressman, in 10 seconds, who do you think is going to be the Republican nominee for president?
Mitt Romney, I think, is probably, although...
Is that an endorsement?
It is not an endorsement. I think it doesn't matter who it is because Barack Obama will be reelected.
We have to go, Congressman. Thank you very much for your time, and I want to thank you for watching, and from everybody at Eyewitness News, have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday. For Ted Nesi and Ian Donis, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.